Starting more than 30 years ago, I was a grad student and we had classes in here regularly, but back then it was a lecture hall with kind of like amphitheater type seating with a stage on front. So I just really don't recognize it here at all. I gave my PhD defense in this room, but it was a very different type of a room back then. But it's great to be back. So yeah, so thanks for coming. And what I want to talk about today is really just some of the work that we're doing in our lab at Hilo. It's the Lope Lab, Listening Observatory for Hawaiian Ecosystems. And really, we're really focused on the ecology and conservation of Hawaiian birds, but particularly focusing on their song. So that's what I want to talk about today is the song of Hawaiian birds, the variability in their song, what it means for their song when their populations are declining, because we know that song is a culturally transmitted trait, sort of like the way human language is a culturally transmitted trait. And so they learn it from each other. And so what happens to their song as the populations are declining, as many of our Hawaiian bird species are. And then I want to talk about the ways that song can be used to improve the way that we monitor the distribution and abundance of our remaining forest bird populations. So we'll be getting into some of the work that we've been doing, creating some AI tools to automatically detect the song of all of the different Hawaiian species of bird, and how that can improve the way we manage our remaining populations. So I'll get started right now. Let's see. I think I can use the cursor here. Okay, so if you go into a Hawaiian forest, and this is the forest at Hakalau, the University of Hawaii Hilo, it could be filled with birds, especially if you're in a place above the mosquito zone where, so you get a good community of forest birds still, but they're not impacted by disease, carrying mosquitoes. It could be filled with birds, but you might hear something like this. Let me see if I can find. You might listen, you might sound. This is a spectrum dog voice. This is a spectrum dog voice. Spectrum is a picture of sounds, right? Trying on the exact on the frequency on the y-axis, frequency range.
We share the conversation or sound. Share sound.
Yeah, since this talk is all about sounds, probably.
I'm sorry. Okay. Two.
I might have done this too. Okay.
Hopefully that works.
So hopefully you guys can hear that. And I apologize to those of you on Zoom. But you could hear these, it's a really diverse array of sounds that you hear, but you might not see one bird the entire time. And that's because the birds are up in the trees, they're hiding in the dense foliage. And so they're just constantly communicating with each other by sound, very little communication by sight. And so sound is a super important behavior that they use. Let's see. Okay, so vocalizations in birds are really important to to everything that they do in their life. That's important, really. So territoriality, attracting mates, foraging. They tell each other where all the best food is. Predator avoidance, which is really important if you've got bird-eating predators around, and then also group cohesion, which for Hawaiian birds seems to be particularly important. They're always calling back and forth, depending on the species, to each other, because in these dense forests, they want to know who's where. So they keep track of each other by just emitting these calls constantly back and forth. Okay. Let's see. I'm not sure how to move forward here.
You could just
There we go. So one thing we have a big lab of students, graduates and undergraduate students at the university. And we are trying to, one thing that we're trying to understand about Hawaiian birds is really just document the variability that exists in their song right now, because it hasn't really been documented until recently. And so we've had students over the last 12 years or so really trying to look at how birdsong varies as you move across the landscape for particular species and over time. It's not like you can't say for any given Hawaiian bird, oh, this is what their song sounds like. It really depends on where you are, which part of the island. And so I'm going to be talking a little bit about that today. And so as I mentioned, also with this variability, we want to know how it varies across the landscape. And then what are the factors responsible for that variability? Including, fragment size. So we know that the landscape is much more fragmented now than it used to be. Has that had an effect on its song? When birds can't share their language among each other. And as I mentioned a little while ago, how does population size affect it? Is their song changing now without as many individuals to learn from compared to before when their population size was much bigger? Kind of like human language, right? As human populations decline in some areas, we're losing languages across the globe. Yeah, the same thing can happen with bird languages, if you want to call it that. So we've had a lot of students working on birdsong variability over the past few years. I'm just going to highlight just a few studies, just for the interest of time. But one study, this is, I think, one of the first ones, student Joshua Peng Ching, he looked at the song of the amakihi, which actually you can see, it's a different species, but you can see amakihi, in the back of Manoa Valley here. And that's the bird up in the right, it's the Hawaii amakihi. And this is Lower Puna on the screen. And so basically, Hilo is up in here, Puna out here, and amakihi exists throughout Lower Puna. So we're looking at, maybe 30 miles distance on that map. And he recorded amakihi, like multiple amakihi at all these different locations throughout the east side of the island. And when we looked at it, their song was significantly different at each of these locations. And you could go back, multiple times, and it's always the same. And so just over kind of short areas of the landscape, their song varies. You can just see the structure here. If you hear the birds singing, it sounds like an amakihi, but when you look at the spectrogram, they're different depending on where you go. So we're still not exactly sure why that is, honestly, but we know that there's this high variability does exist. Other birds, the eevi. We don't really have eevi left on this island anymore. They're still pretty common in parts of the Big Island. Angela Beck looked at variability in the eevi and found that they're variable at the individual level. So if you follow one individual eevi around for long periods of time and document all the different songs and calls that it makes, and then you follow another individual amakihi or eevi, most of what it says, some of what it says is going to overlap, but it also uses a lot of different syllables that you didn't hear in the other bird. And so there's some bits of their language that's probably made up in a way. And they probably use it as individual recognition, I think, for who's calling and where they are. But this is what an eevi sounds like. I'll play the spectrogram for you. Remember, this is time on the x-axis and then the frequency on the y. And like a lot of birds, their song, they're named after what they sound like. So you can kind of pick up eevi from the eevi call. If you listen carefully, you use your imagination. That's a Hakalau. Here's another eevi. anyhow, I do, one thing I like to do with the EEV, when we're analyzing EEV in the lab, when we're analyzing any bird song, sometimes you need to slow the song down because, birds, their brains are moving faster than ours. And so what they hear when they sing is different than what we hear because their brains are just moving differently. And so if we slow it down, we can pick up more of the structure from their song, at least we can hear it. So this is like at 0.2 speed, and it really changes sort of what they're saying. And it sounds, see if you guys, tell me what you think this sounds like when you hear the EV slowed down. That was the EV. Right here. Anyway, I get a trap.
Yeah. A bus.
A bus, yeah. Anyhow, I won't dwell. Oma'o, this is a native Hawaiian thrush, the Oma'o, and we've had 3 different students studying the song of this bird over the last 10 years, and they're another one where every individual pretty much uses a completely different set of syllables. So syllables are basically the structures that they put together multiple syllables to form a song, and they put their song together using different syllables, and that varies with individual. So I think that they're just constantly learning and adding to their song as they age. But again, just very, very different between individuals in their song. I'll just let you hear what the Oma'o sounds like here. Here it comes again. All right, I won't play the other Oma'o, but so you can still hear those pretty commonly, like if you're above Hilo, if you drive up on the Saddle Road, go out into the Kipuka there, you can still hear the Oma'o. The thrush are pretty much extinct on all the other Hawaiian islands except for Kauai. Kauai still has the thrush, the Huaioki, but there's only a couple hundred of them left on Hawaii plateau. But the thrush on Hawaii Island, the Oma'o, is still doing pretty well, at least on the east side of Hawaii. And then we had another student who was following Oma'o around with transmitters on them and recording them at the same time, and found that not only are they really variable in what they say to each other, their individual repertoire, but they change what they say based on where they are in the landscape. So if they're in the dense forest part of their territory, they use a certain part of their repertoire. And then we go out in the open part of the away from the forest, they change what they say to each other. And so she, basically created these heat maps looking at the different types of Oma'o vocalizations, calls and songs and whisper songs versus just not doing anything. And she created these maps to show that it really varies across the landscape in what they say, individual level. So there's a lot going on with Oma'o behavior, with bird behavior in general, that we don't understand why they're doing this, but we're just seeing these patterns right now. That's the next thing. Why do the patterns exist? Apapane, this is a bird, actually, I have a picture of an Eevee here, but I'm talking about Apapane. This is a bird that, I'll show a picture of it next, I think. I think I'll just show the next slide to make it more straightforward. So the Apapane is in the upper right. And so our student, Paulo Ditzel, he just did a study last year, and he found that, the Kipuka, if you go to the Big Island, and you drive up the Saddle Road, it's that Kipuka system where on the windward side of Mauna Loa, the lava will come down the sides of the mountain and create all these patches of forest habitats surrounded by lava flows, and the forest is thousands of years old. And that's represented on the slide here. And Apapane live in all of these forest patches, and they fly among all the forest patches regularly. But the songs of the Apapane in each little fragment, and these can only be separated by maybe a few hundred meters to a kilometer, the song is different in every one. If you go to one fragment, for example, right here, one kipuka, and you start documenting all the apapane song, all the common syllables, you start hearing certain things. It's like in this kipuka, it's mostly and then you go to the next kipuka up here, and you hardly hear any of the they're doing something else there. And even though the birds are mixing, it's not like they're territorial and staying within these kipuka. They're mixing between them because we've had other studies where we put transmitters on the birds and we can see they move around the landscape pretty substantially. Still, these dialects or these sets of syllables that they use are stable for a given location. Why is that? We actually have no idea why. We've never heard of this before anywhere else in the world, actually, at this level. We're trying to figure out some reasons, and we do have some ideas. We probably won't get into it right now, but it's just, I guess, really just trying to highlight how variable. So even with between individuals, their song is variable, and then they'll say certain things to each other in given locations, and then they don't even say those in other locations. So I guess the point is that individuals do share a lot of syllables that they say, but they also have a bunch that are only for themselves. And what they often share can be typical of a place, but then you don't hear that in the next place you go.
Sorry, you said they move around a lot, but
They
still
do.
keep their individual song. Do they
Yeah.
come back to do they have a home kipuka and they go out and visit
They
and come
do
back,
seem
or
to
do
have-
they just?
They do seem to have a home kipuka. Yeah, so it's almost like the language or the dialect of that kipuka stays stable. And when birds move through it, they pick up that dialect, but then they pick up those syllables, but then they don't sit because that's what you're supposed to say in that place. It's kind of like if you pick up a southern accent as you're driving through the south of the US, and then you pick up a northeastern accent as you're going through Boston. That's like what the birds are doing, kind of, I know, it's really weird. And so as I mentioned, one thing we're really intrigued about, we know that bird song is super important at all these different levels. And so we're trying to understand what happens when their populations decline, because they're learning this from each other. What happens when their populations decline to the sort of richness of their song? And so we've done some studies where we've gotten historic recordings of birds from the past when they were doing a lot better than they are now. So this particular study was from Kauai, and we got recordings that were made of bird populations there, the Akikiki, the Akike'e, the Kauai Amakihi, the Anianiao. And we analyzed the recordings for sort of the complexity of their song. And then we went out and got recent recordings and compared the two. So in the earlier ones, they had learned from a lot pretty healthy populations of birds. In the later ones, as these slides show, the Akikiki is actually now considered to be functionally extinct in the wild, unfortunately. These are just projections for its population size. This is a few years old now, but it's projected to decline by 2040 to be at zero. It's actually at zero now, unfortunately, 15 years before that. The Akike'e, there's still about 150 of them out there, but it's not looking so good for it either. We did this study because we talked to biologists working in Kauai, and when I used to go and do transects, listening for the birds on Kauai, we would learn the song of the Akike'e. It's like, okay, we'd hear it, that's an Akike'e. We'd learn the song of the Akikiki. Okay, we'd hear that, it's Akikiki. Nowadays, when you go out there, you hear a song, and the biologist can't tell what species it is anymore. And it seems that the songs have converged together. They're not as different as they used to be. And so we were trying to look at that in more detail. And so what we found were some significant differences in song structure of all the birds, really between the 70s, you can see on the left, and present day on the right. I've got just some recordings. This is just an example of the Akike'e from the 70s. You can hear it here. So, it sounds like that, we call that a trill. So it's like a rapid series of similar notes. And it's lost some of the complexity, and all the different species kind of sound like that. Yeah. And we think it's because the population size has declined to the point where they're not learning their song necessarily from only their own species, but there's so few individuals around that they're learning it from whatever species happens to be around. It might be their species, it might be another similar one. So it's kind of like become more of a common song because there's just not the populations there to keep the structure of the different species separate anymore. And so I just, honestly, I could talk for hours about bird song variability in Hawaii, and I'm just kind of giving you guys just a little bit of the tip of the iceberg on some of the studies that have been done by students in our lab. I just wanted to be sure to have time to focus on two more things for the rest of this talk. And one of those is the way, it's really kind of the focus of the research in our lab for about the last 3 years, which is trying to use the song of birds to improve the way that we monitor them across the landscape, okay? And so traditionally right now, the way that we keep track of bird populations, if you look at bird population estimates, they're all based on people going out in the field and doing what we call point counts, where you go to a station and you stand there for 8 minutes and you write down every individual species that you hear, and you estimate the density to that bird from your station. And you're standing in that spot for 8 minutes, and then you get a list in your book, and you do that for a whole bunch of stations along transects, and that gets converted into density estimates by a lot of statistics to get population size estimates. It's incredibly labor intensive, and it takes a lot of training for bird counters, because you've got to know every song of every species, and you've got to do this across the landscape, and oftentimes in super bad conditions in very remote places. And so I've really long wanted to improve. I've done a lot of these surveys myself over the decades. And I've always thought that there should be ways to improve that using newer techniques and new technologies, right? And so we do have passive acoustic monitoring now. It's becoming more commonly used across the globe, where you can buy these small units like that one there. It's a song meter, and you can put them out in the forest. They're waterproof. These things have only been around really for about the past 12 or 13 years. This is all fairly new. You can program them to record as long as you want for up to a couple months on any record. You go back out, you collect the sound cards, the battery, you replace the battery, you can leave them out for years if you want, if they don't get waterlogged. And you come back and you take it to the lab, and you've got this massive amount of soundscape data. And then, until really recently, there's been no way to automate the processing of that data. We're talking like, we have like over 100 terabytes of birdsong soundscape data in our lab. And typically, when we're doing a study, we have to have undergrads and grad students manually go through and find songs from all of these hours of recordings, find the species. And so we've been really working on really like for the last 10 years is to be able to automate this process so we can put out acoustic sensors across the landscape and then automatically detect the songs and calls of all the different species, so we can monitor how the numbers of songs and calls changes over time and across the landscape, so we can better track bird population size and presence and absence and all these things, right? So we've been working on this for a while. The problem is AI, artificial intelligence in acoustics, in birdsong is, sorry, I gotta learn how to swipe better. It's really behind where it's like facial recognition is far ahead of things like voice recognition for wildlife. And it's really kind of only in the last couple of years with, we've been working with the Cornell lab of ornithology a lot on this. So basically, the way to train AI tools for song recognition in birds is you get a whole bunch of students, like so these are some of the ones shown right here, and you go through all these hours of recordings and you say, okay, they put selections, little boxes around every song and call. First, they have to learn all the songs, and then they go through all these recordings and they select them. We use this as training data for the AIs. And so this is just, some of the species, just the numbers of selections that we've made from all of these hours of recordings to then train these AI models, right? And so we were working with Cornell Lab because they've got a tool, it's called BirdNet. It's a bird song classifier. It's an app, you can put it on your phone. It goes with the Merlin app if you're into birds. If you go to North America, continental North America, you go to Europe, I've got BirdNet on my phone. If I hear a bird singing, I just record it with my phone and it'll tell me what species it is with a probability associated with that. So it's like, most likely it's a, nightjar or something, 80% probability. So I'll usually take that, okay, there's probably one up there, then I'll start looking for the nightjar in the trees or something. But it's never 100%. It's never 100, well, rarely is it 100%. So we were working with Cornell Lab. We've incorporated Hawaiian birds into BirdNet, but because of the variability, it's still not that good for Hawaiian birds, BirdNet. If you put BirdNet on your phone and go out and record an Apapane, it's probably going to call it something else. And this is actually 2 years of training. And so this is just kind of an example. It's okay. These are all these different species on the x-axis, and the precision. Is it correct when we know what the song is of the bird? How accurate is BirdNet in predicting it? That's on the y-axis. Some birds it was pretty good, but the problem is, and the way this is happening really across the country right now, is that because it's all deals in probabilities of the song between 0 and 1, if you want to know if a bird is present in a certain spot and it's a rare bird and it says, okay, you've had your recorder out there for a long time and it says, okay, there's a 70% chance I just picked up this oma'o. Well, okay, what do you do with that? There's a 70% chance. Is it there or not? Well, it's a good chance it is, but you can't say for sure. And so this is kind of a big issue we're dealing with when we want to put out these landscape scale recorders to really monitor bird populations. And this graph, and so what people are doing, certain labs across the country, they're setting these thresholds where they're saying, I'm going to throw out all my detections below 50% probability of that, which is a huge amount of data. When you're dealing with rare birds, you're throwing away good data potentially. And then so like this graph is only for the birds that cross the first threshold. So they classified it as, okay, this is most likely 50% or greater. So then we took that whole subset and then we reran it again. And so then this is what it looks like after you take that subset of the data. Okay, so what we've been doing lately, we've kind of let go of BirdNet for now in our lab, and we're working with a new model, and it's called Perch. And this model was developed by a guy named Tom Denton at Google. And so we're working really closely with Tom right now, and to develop new ways of automatically detecting birds and using their probabilities in a different way. So basically, created this new type of variable. It's called call density. Okay, and so this is call density. We just submitted this paper. This is the preprint right here on the right. We just submitted that 2 weeks ago. But it basically it's a way of taking all of the probability scores for the bird song. So if it's 10%, we're going to use it. If it's 100%, we're going to use it. And it's a very it's a complicated process. I'm not sure if I have time to describe it right now, but basically it bins up all of these probabilities and then it puts them into it creates like a histogram, a probability histogram, where all of the calls There are 70% go into one bin, between 70 and 100%. All the calls between 50 and 70 go into another bin. And then you validate each bin. So basically it automatically gives you 100 samples from each bin. And you look at each of those samples and say, okay, was it or wasn't it what it said it was? And then it basically, that creates a new distribution, and then it bootstraps within each of those bins. It creates this new variable. I'm just going to show the variable here, where you can get a highly accurate estimate of the call rates of these birds with error bars around them, which is something that we've been looking for years. And so it's a much more accurate way of detecting birds than we've had in the past. And so it's a way of using even the 10% probabilities and the 20% probabilities in a much more robust way than we were able to use before. And so these are just an example of just some of the first data sets that we've produced with this model. And these are for like 20 different song mirrors from the Alakai Plateau on Kauai for the yellowbirds. So this was all those songs that sound the same of the yellowbirds. And so the recorders were out there for a month, and you can see that each of the recorders had a call density with an estimate of variability around it, showing the hot spots and the cold spots for these yellowbirds. So that's mean calls per minute on the y-axis. And so we feel like this is a really big advance for acoustically monitoring birds across the landscape. And I'm just super excited to start using it, as I'll be mentioning here in a second. So basically, we feel like this is really the most accurate tool that exists for monitoring birds, particularly Hawaii, but really I think it can be used anywhere, this bird song, this no thresholds model. And so it's going to really allow us to better, to improve the scale at which we can monitor birds. So right now, if you go out in the forest, send these crews out, and you go out once a year to make estimates of their population size. Now we can have these recorders out there all year long, and we can, it takes like a couple hours to analyze months of data now on the computer. And so we can look at how their populations vary monthly and across the landscape much quicker than we could before. So it's much more efficient, and we can cover larger areas with a lot less logistical problems and a lot less having to train people to learn birds too. We can look at seasonal annual patterns of abundance. We can look at new species occurring outside their home range. There's all kinds of really cool biological questions we can answer now. These are just some, I'm just, how are we going to 409, okay?
We've got till 4:20 as the end.
Okay. Just super quick, we really want to get to density. So these are just graphs that we produced on Monday and Tuesday. So we're comparing human-based point counts to these. When we did the point counts, we had people with recorders in their hands. And so we're estimating call rate acoustically and comparing that to the way humans estimate it. We're finding really close relationships between the call density estimators that I just showed you guys, and the number of, this is basically the number of birds estimated by humans on the x-axis. So there's a really good tight relationship. In ecology, I love R-squared, it's greater than 0.9. Don't get that very often. So for all the species, you can see there's a good relationship between the number of birds that were counted by human counters in the forest and this estimate of call density that we've made with the bioacoustics. So for Oma'o, and then also for the Apapani, really tight relationships there. So human counts on the x-axis, these are like, this is like Kona Forest in 2003. So this represents a lot of stations. And this is all of the acoustic detections for that time. Really close relationships. So we're really excited about this being able to improve the way we can monitor birds while moving forward. Okay, so we're already working with a lot of agencies right now, deploying these acoustic monitors across the landscape. Guys, maybe you've heard about the release of the sterile mosquitoes, the IIT. We're working with Maui forest birds and with Hawaii forest birds to put out networks of recorders, experimental and control to look at the effects of the mosquito release on bird abundance using bioacoustics. You can use bioacoustics for seabirds detections. We're looking at long-term trends of hakalau along transects with acoustic monitors. More recently, we're going to expand this work into Palau and Pohnpei and Samoa because they also need some assistance with monitoring their wildlife. And so these are things that you can just train anyone to do, put out these recorders in the landscape, collect the data, send them to us, and then we can actually analyze their data for them and let them know how their populations are doing. So as part of a PyCast grant, we're also creating a cloud-based sound repository. So these recordings take up massive amounts of data. And so we now have a cloud-based repository you can upload it to just for free, and then we can actually help people analyze their data if they're interested. Okay, so I just wanted to finish with some of the work that I've been doing, as we mentioned, with a bird hui called Ahui Manu. And so really it has all to do with sound, again, just like I've been talking about. And so basically it's a group of bird lovers, mostly Hawaii Island, but all the islands really. We get together every few weeks and we're led by Kumu Kekuhi, Keali'i Kanaka Ole o Haililani. And she is the one really kind of the driving force behind all this. But what, a lot of us are biologists, or we add like our perspective, like our scientific perspective about the birds. People share stories with the birds, about the birds. And so the idea is what Kekuhi wanted to do was create a new bird oli that sort of it's a bird creation chant, is what Kekuhi wanted to do, which follows, really, she calls it the Kumulipo tooth for birds, which is each bird, every Hawaiian bird that needs help, which is pretty much all of them, gets a verse in the oli. And in that verse, we connect the bird with a fish from the sea or a creature from the sea that's doing well, and a plant from the land that's doing well, and ties them together in a way in the verse. And it basically just creates this vision for them moving forward in greater health and abundance through this kind of traditional lashing together of them. Yeah. And so one part of the oli that's fun, and we've performed this, it's a really long oli because there's a lot of Hawaiian birds. And so each species has its own hauku or verse. But the first line of every verse, it's kind of like follows the kumulipo, and then it goes like, if we're talking about the uau, for example, the first line is like in the kumulipo, hanau ka uau. And then it goes kani. So kani is sound or sing. But instead of saying kani, you're supposed to imitate the sound of the bird. So you're supposed to imitate a different bird in every verse, right? Mm-hmm. So Kekuhi thinks this is, and I agree too, it's very important because it kind of makes people more connected with the birds when you're imitating them. Yeah. And so, and the cool thing is a lot of our Hawaiian birds are named after the sounds that they make. So for example, the uau, if you go hanau ka uau, instead of saying kani, you would go uau, uau, uau. And so when we do the oli, usually we'll say hanau ka uau, and then everybody in the audience goes uau, uau, uau. And then you go to the next, and then just repeat the next. So if you guys want to just do a few of them, I'm just going to do the oli for you just to finish this off. I'm sorry. Okay, I have 5 minutes. That's about how long it takes. I'll do the oli. So there's going to be, I think, 4 birds that I would recommend trying to imitate. Okay, the uau, which is going to be the second one. See, when she says hanau ka uau, and she kind of does it herself, she'll go uau, uau, uau. So that's when everyone's supposed to go uau, uau, uau. Yeah, can you guys do it? Uau, uau, uau. Perfect. Another one is the nene. You guys know why the nene is called nene? Well, I think one of the things it does is it goes nah, nah, nah. So when she says hanau ka ne, and she'll do that too. Ne, ne. So ne, ne. Yeah. And then she'll say, and then we'll get to oh, there's a bunch of them. Amakihi, I think. Amakihi does a trill. It's like a chi 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 chi. Chi 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 chi. I think she does that too. So if you guys could do that when we get to Amakihi. Chi 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 chi. Yeah. Perfect. And then finally, I think she'll do the alala, and she basically just goes alala, alala. It's not a very good imitation of alala, but they do a lot of things. Most of it's like rah, rah. You don't have to try and do that. Anyways, I'm gonna play it. It's gonna play through as a movie, so I'm not gonna be able to stop it once it starts. But if you could just look for those birds, and we'll try and all imitate it when it comes up. Okay, so it'll be what did I say? Wa'u, Nene, Amakihi, and Alala. Okay, I'll start it here.
O ka lelea nei auna o ka hakai a lalani o hono a pa ka aina o Hawaii kua ui o hua lau ka maa kua puka kane keiki he manukai lele. Nau ta iwa ala I maka ki ai ka he no hoi ka iwala maulu e te iwe no hoi u ka o ka iwa auna lele a pa hia.
Here's the Wa'u.
No ka ua u te wow. Kia I ke kola no hoi ke iola maulo e te puki ave no hoi u ka o ta ua u auna lele a pa hia. No ka a kin kia ka pa pio no hoi ke iola maulo e ta ali no hoi u ka o ka a auna lele a pa hia. Hanau ka manu o ku kan kia ka malolo no hoi kai wala maulo kan niu no hoi u ka o ka manu o ku au na lele a pa hia. Hanau ke kolo a maoli kaning kia ka pahun hoi kai wala maulo e ta hai wale no hoi u ka o ke kolo a maoli o I maka kolo na nei ho pa kele kia li o ka u pa hia. Hanau ka nene kan kia I kalimu kala no I kai wala maulo I te kukai nene no I u ka o ka nene au na lele a pa hia. Hanau ke kurukuru ai o kan kia I ka hano I kai wala maulo I ke kurukuru ai o no I u ka o ka ai o au na lele a pa hia. Hanau kala alai ula kan kia I kalimu aki no hoi kai wala maulo e te ili ahi no hoi u ka o ka alai ula au na lele a pa hia. Hanau ka au ku kani kia I kalala kia no hoi kai wala maulo e te ili ma no hoi u ka o ka au ku au na lele a pa hia. O ka lele a nei au na o ka hakai a lalani o hono a pa ka aina o Hawaii kua uli o hua lau ka maa kua puka kana keiki he manu aina lele. Hanau ka ki kini kia I ka uki no hoi kai ola maulo e te umi ko no hoi u ka o ka aki au na lele a pa hia. Hanau ka alawa hio kan kia I ka palu o kana loa noho a maulo I ka malu kana ulu tala lawa hio au na lele a pa hia. Hua ka io palina mai ka wai ai o ahu mai o ahu I molo ka I kalai o ha lele a kalai o kala au a ina na ia lele maui nui. Uri a ku kona nuku ia lo nui a kia iu ka o kawali. O lupea te tumu hau he kahuno pali la. Kia I kalai pala noho I kai wala maulo I ka nahi o noho me ka mamani noho iu ka o ka pali la au na lele a pa hia. O wai ke kia o ka wau makali. O a kia pola au ke kia ia ka ina Ola mauloi ke koa noho iu ka o ka a kia pola au na lele a paapahia. Hanau ki kiwi kiu kani. Kia i e o hiu hiu noho i kai ola mauloi ke kanawao noho iu ka o ke kiwi kiu au na lele a paapahia. Eia e o ama ki manu kupai naha ouka. Manu holu na pina pe ama ki kaulani ho. Kaulani ka ho o lai ka mai. Mai ki kura nui o mano ai pele kuna molokai. Mai kala pana ai maku upuna. Ha nau ka ama ki hikani ki ai ka mamu noho i kai ola maulo i o helo noho i uka. Nau ka ake ke e kini ki ai e ke noho i kai ola maulo i po a noho i uka. O ka ake ke auna lele a paapahia. Hanau ka ake pakan kia ia ka a veo noho i kai ola maulo i ta a veo noho i uka. O ka ake pa auna lele a paapahia. Hanau ka a kohe chop. A kia ia ka laini noho i uka. Ola maulo i ke kohe noho i uka. O ka a kohe auna lele a paapahia. O ma o ko ili ke kua lo no na o ma o kan kia e ka ama no i kai o la ma lo i o la pa no i u ka o ka o ma o auna lele a pa kau o me e ka le vala ni o vai mai alala o vai mai alala nei o alala ke ki ia ka ama no i kai uola maulo ka i no i ka o ka alala na lele a pa hia
Didn't have a chance to do the Alawa, yes.
O uli kamanu ki lo moku kamano hele ho nua mano hele lani kia I kamano no hoi kai ola maulo I kani oi no hoi uka o ka I o auna lele a pa hia Eia e o kale hua pue o kinola o kane I ka pahua au ma kua o kale hu o ta pue o oe kani ki ai e ka o puno hui kai wola maulo I ka ohi anoho I ka o ka pue o auna lele a paapahia O nā manu lele au nā mai kana loa I ka hakai mai kaha kai a I ulu o hi mai kaha kai a I ke alo tamau nā
First track.
Wa kua Wa ola papalua kala hui manu a ola olo yeah.
Yeah, so we actually originally, this was a planetarium show, so we have the Imiloa Planetarium above UH Hilo. So we created as the original, well, when it's not done in person, it was a planetarium. So we just really recently put it on the PowerPoint so you can see it's a little jerky and all that. Anyways, we're still adding to it. You can, if you know all the Hawaiian birds, you know, probably you can see EV and Apapane there. And there's a few others. And so we get together every few weeks and add just stories and content. Like the one, you know, she mentioned Pulanuio Wais or Manoa. So that had to do with the Amakihi getting resistant to disease on different islands. And so it's places that you can still see the Amakihi, including here, because it's, even though there's mosquitoes present, they've become resistant to the mosquito-borne disease. So this bully is incorporating a lot of new knowledge as well as old stories. So it's kind of a contemporary. It's been fun to work with a little bit. But yeah, that's basically all I wanted to talk about. Sorry about going over everybody. your credits here. And yeah, any questions?
All right.